Hello, I'm Mischievous Marcinacchio, and I own every issue of Amazing Spider-Man, Amazing Fantasy number 15, and all of the Amazing Spider-Man annuals and spectacular annuals and web of annuals. But those annuals do not count.
All right. Well, I'm Dapper Dan Gavosden, and I own every issue of Amazing Spider-Man, which, if you listen to the show, I'm sure you know. But I think it's always worth reminding people that I also have all of the annuals, got them first before Mark, including the web of and spectacular annuals. And I think, look, I'm going to make a case that the Amazing Spider-Man ones count. You can discount the annuals and the other series all you want, although there's some good stories there. But for me, and this is truly the way that I win or lose this race, Amazing Fantasy 15 remains a fantasy for me.
Yep, you didn't get that one first, Dan. That is the cold truth. Anyway, welcome to the Amazing Spider Talk, the show where two fans and collectors uncover the strange, fun, and fascinating history of the Spider-Man comic universe. And of course, thanks for joining us for this review episode of Amazing Spider-Man Volume 7.
Yeah, and if we're a little bit loopy tonight, as that intro might imply, it's because truly we both have opened the Hellgate that is summer right now, and we're in a heat bubble, I think they're calling it. At least here in Maryland, it's like 100, 110 degrees and super humid after a week of rain, and we're just like swimming in the air right now, just sweating profusely. And so I think Mark and I are both like low on fluids that Mark is quickly replacing with beer.
I have water too, Dan. I've been drinking water all day, but still.
Okay, fair enough. All right. Well, if you want to spring along with us on our journey through Spidey's past, present, and future, be sure to subscribe to Amazing Spider Talk on your favorite podcast app and leave us a review.
This podcast exists because of the support of our Patreon members. If you'd like to receive early reviews, seasonal episodes, exclusive podcasts, and artwork, and help us keep this podcast ad-free, please visit AmazingSpiderTalk.com and click on that big old Patreon button to sign up.
Yeah, today on the show, Mark and I are going to be discussing Amazing Spider-Man Volume 7, Number 6. This issue was written by Joe Kelly. The cover and interiors feature pencils by John Romita Jr., inks by Scott Hanna, colors by Marcio Menyz, and of course, letters by VC's Joe Caramagna. Is this the Zeb Wells run? No, it's not. But it feels awful like it all of a sudden. This issue was first released on June 18th, 2025. So, Mark, why don't you hit us with a recap of the events of Amazing Spider-Man Volume 7, Number 6.
Sounds like a plan, Dan. For the first time in a long time, things are going great for Peter, or at least moderately okay and not existentially dreadful. Peter's current job at Rent Enterprises has gotten back on track, and if he can stop being late or absent like 75% of the time, Dr. Osmani sees some long-term growth for him that she doesn't see for Mr. Mushroomhead over there, Brian, who is currently acting out the opening sequences of The Last of Us. See, I wouldn't know that because I don't watch that show, Dan, but that's okay. See what not being high as a kite can get you, Peter? He's stopping crime, telling quips, and oh wait, is that the Tombstone's limo pulling up? Of course, there's something Peter doesn't want to deal with. Indeed, Lonnie has a message for Peter's friend. He suggests that there's some trouble in the neighborhood and Spidey will know what to do. Well, crap. That doesn't preclude Spidey from having a little meetup with Black Cat, which then segues naturally into a meetup with Shay. And while they're enjoying their coffees and acting all sweet to each other, Shay lets Peter know she has another date tonight. What? You think you can judge her, Peter? She sees that silver white hair in your clothes, and it's probably not Aunt May's. Why would they even, Dan? Why we even suggest that? But also, if they want to be exclusive, you better put a ring on it, or at least not be such a flake. Fair enough. Putting that in Peter's mind, of course, sends him back to Felicia to fool around, so there you go. Don't change, Peter. Well, do change. Seriously, everyone is begging you to change, Peter. Look at the internet. It's never wrong. We then get a check-in-a-thon. Aunt May's new friend certainly doesn't seem to like Peter all that much. And then we check in with Norman, and he's still talking like a supervillain about his responsibility for the Hobgoblin. And, oh, did you realize Peter and Norman are friends now? Because this text reminds us again Anyway, Spider-Man's life is spectacular as he stakes out Hobgoblin's latest gang activity with Black Cat thanks to Tombstone's tip, but then his spider sense goes off, and here comes Hellgate, ready to take the two of them to the gates of... hell, right? Dan, where else could they be going? Like, to Twitter? I don't know what else to say.
Well, I don't know either. I guess we're going to find out next issue. This was like kind of the introducing Hellgate issue, and we didn't really get much more to go on here. He kind of repeats the same line as last time. But this is the start of a next, I think, mini arc. And I feel like every new issue of this book, we're all kind of walking on a tightrope. We're feeling like, okay, is this the one where it like falls apart? Just because we've been so used to like getting a little bit of something great and then watching like all of the wrong choices be made. And this issue to me was just kind of one of those safe issues. We're used to getting the check-in issue with a little bit of drama that sets the stakes for maybe something to come, but really just kind of makes the rounds with the supporting cast and is frankly pretty transparent about it. Like Spidey shows up somewhere, gets a bit of information, and then says, I gotta go. I've got more people to check in with in this comic. Mark, what'd you think about this issue?
Look, you made the quip about it when you were going through the creative team for this issue, but like it honestly, if I didn't know better, I would have thought this was like from volume 6 from the Zeb Wells run, and like not in a bad way, you know what I mean? Like in the like this was like a classic Zeb Wells kind of just setup issue, except it was Joe Kelly, so it had things like Last of Us jokes in there, which I guess I like there's got to be at least one zeitgeist joke that just goes completely over my head, either current.
You have a PlayStation now, Mark. You need to buy 10 copies of The Last of Us. That's just how it works.
Okay, fair enough, Dan, but although I don't love horror, we've gone through this anyway, but no, yeah, this was a totally like cromulent issue, like I don't, like it was very transparent in its check-in-ness of it. At the same time, like, I feel like this comic continues to be more focused than I expected it to be coming into this run in terms of like where it wants its lens to be fixed on in terms of who in the supporting cast. We're I don't know if we're necessarily advancing stories, but we're at least acknowledging the stories of the people that we want to be acknowledging. It's not like, Norman is, when we check in on Norman Osborn, it's not like we're going like in some other random direction when we're checking in on Aunt May or Felicia. It's Shay. These are all like, within the boxes of where I expect these characters to be at this point. And outside of Hellgate, it's not like we're getting a bunch of new characters. I think the return to Tombstone was fun, I guess, there's a part of me that's like, well, I guess we didn't get that far removed from him. Although I guess it's also how many months now? Time's a flat circle, Dan. But it's totally fine storytelling here.
Yeah, I agree with all that. I think if I were to label any kind of real critique about this issue, it's that I think Joe Kelly in the last arc proved that he could do these kind of check-ins more organically to a ongoing story. But like, there's a classic, like long-held tradition of issues like this one. Although I also think the other critique I would offer is every status quo check-in, it feels like maybe not even a baby step forward with some of these check-ins. Like, if anything, it's more like putting a pin or making sure each thing is clear. What's happening from before. Like Shay, like we knew that they weren't exclusive. Here, it really makes it clear that they're not. Right? Yeah. With Felicia, we knew that they had hooked up. Here, we get it's conclusive that that's an ongoing thing. May has another man in her life, it seems, and that seems very definitive. And she also is thematically asking Peter to step up, and so on and so forth. Like Peter is solid at his job, and she's asking for him to step up if he wants more responsibility. Okay, cool. He's solid at his job. He's not going to lose it, but we see still doing the same behavior. Like everything is just being advanced like a hair.
Yeah.
And it doesn't make for anything like terribly exciting to read. But again, moving a hair is kind of like the name of the game in sequential comics, especially for something that prints twice a month. And so I'm okay with it. Like all the characters were reinforced, and I don't have to guess what this book is interested in. Whereas long parts of the Zeb Wells run, you know, I'm wondering what thematically the book is about. And here I feel like, okay, maybe it's a little bit blunt and a little bit half-stepsy, but I feel very like cared for, that the writer wants to make sure that we're on board with him as we move forward.
Yeah, no, that well said on all of that. I mean, you know, like, I think probably if there was any new information, I guess it was just that this friend of May's doesn't like Peter. So I guess, you know, like there's the potential conflict there that comes forward. But
it's the reincarnation of Nathan Lubezki.
Yeah. Although I feel like Nathan was more like, I'm going to be a father to you, Peter, when he first was introduced, you know, before he became like a degenerate gambler and whatever else weird stuff he was into over the course of that run.
Oh, just you wait until this guy is like doing like online gambling or, you know, he's trading crypto or something like that. Just you wait, Mark.
Fair enough, Dan. Fair enough. But
the only other thing I wanted to add is like this book starts off with this, and you said it in your recap really well, this like thematic statement about like Peter is happy, right? Like everything is, maybe it's not everything is going right, but he feels like content where he's at right now.
Right.
But I wish I knew more about like where that was coming from exactly, because it's kind of in conflict with all the other plot lines that are going on in this book, where all these other people are asking him to like step up, right? Like at work, we need to see more of you if you want to take on responsibility. Shay is like, hey, you know, like we're not exclusive because, you know, there's a potential for that, but in the meantime, I'm not going to wait around for you. And May the same, right? Everybody's asking him to step up. And normally that's in conflict with like him being Spider-Man. Like Peter is like sad about that. Like he's like, I wish I could be doing all of these things, except Spider-Man gets in the way, right? As like beautifully shown in like the Sam Raimi Spider-Man 2, where the minute Spidey goes away, he gets to excel at all the other avenues in his life. And yet here, Peter kind of seems fine with the status quo, like telling himself that he has plenty of time for things to change. He says that directly to May. And I guess I wish I like knew, is that true? Is Peter like truly at his happiest when he doesn't really feel the need to step up into responsibility into all these roles? Because that's kind of a change for him. Because I feel like he's always strived to do more and felt held back. And, you know, I don't want to assume that like Peter wants to get married and wants to, you know, do all the sort of like cultural ideals of like a healthy person.
Yeah.
Right? Like people are allowed to have their own wants and desires. And maybe Peter just wants to exist comfortably with this dichotomy. But I don't think we're given any reflection on that when people like challenge him. You know, he might be like, you know what? Osmani wants me to be the leader of this group, but I'm happy not being and just being Spider-Man. And maybe I'm like, you know, picking a hair and we should just assume that Peter does want to do all these things. But I feel like it's weird to spend so much time focusing on what he's not achieving in a book where the through line is, here's how happy I am.
Yeah, I mean, I see what you're saying. I mean, my honest take on it was just like, you know, we literally experienced an entire volume of comics where Peter was kind of depressed and and morose. And you know, this book from the very first issue of this new volume has kind of gone out of its way to you know, trying to, you know, like bring Peter out of it, if you will. And, you know, either by bringing in his past and kind of what he's learned from it and all that. So like I almost kind of took the beginning not as a joke necessarily, but like I think it does kind of point out the bipolar nature that is Peter Parker / Spider-Man, which is like what is actually better for him right now. On its face, actually not much, because like, you know, he's still missing in action at work. He's still dealing with Tombstone. He still doesn't really have his love life in order, but he, you know, it's vibes, baby. He's feeling better. And that's almost kind of good enough for me. You know, if he's feeling better, then his life is good right now, because
it's like grading on the Peter Parker curve.
Yeah. I don't know. Yeah. Like, I'm not trying to explain it away, but like, I didn't look into it as deeply as you did, because I don't know if it's meant to be deep. You know what I mean? I think it's more just like, you know, like obviously, you know, the weight, you know, especially in the beginning of volume 6, the weight of what happened with MJ and all that was just so heavy on that book. So like, we're just kind of coming at this like, hey, you know, like my life's still a mess, but at the end of the day, it's not that bad and I'm happy with it, you know? And it's like, okay, I can deal with that, because like, you know, there's some good things to be found in there. He hasn't been fired. You know, he hasn't been kicked out of Aunt May's life, despite the fact that he's unreliable. Shay hasn't completely walked out on him. Like, okay, you know, Norman hasn't tried to kill him in a couple of months, so that's good.
Take the win, yeah. And I will say too, like, it's obviously the book is structured like a joke, right? Like the beginning is all, here's all the happiness, and then here's some like the mixed results. But then at the very end, he states like, truly, like everything's going great, and then Hellgate shows up, right? And so like that's meant to be the punchline of like, just you wait to see how much this guy shatters those good vibes moving forward, right? Like, and that's what all the advertising has been, is like, wait till you see like what, you know, how much Hellgate is going to send Peter reeling over the next 2 issues. And so I suspect, like, you know, more arc-wise, this will set up as the sort of false, you know, zone of comfort before the coming storm, so to speak. So the other big change, I guess, as much as some things are new, new is old. You know, like we've gotten Pepe Larraz, you know, and his team kind of doing the issues so far in this run, and we haven't seen much of John Romita Jr., Scott Hanna, and Marcio Menyz, the old team that we knew was coming back. We've seen sort of backups from them, but now they get to really debut their work alongside Joe Kelly. And we really had like heralded their work in the Zeb Wells run. What'd you think of them here on this sort of, I don't know, every issue should test an artist's talents. This one is not quite the big, you know, blockbuster stuff that Larraz was getting to do, but, you know, a lot of character acting and stuff. What'd you think of their work on this title?
I mean, look, I always love seeing JRJR and Hanna and Menyz on this book. You know, again, like so much of this book felt like we were back in the Zeb Wells run, and you know, frankly, maybe it was just also the look and feel of it as well. So like it you know, as much as it kind of pains me to say it as a fan, like it did kind of feel like a bit of a step back for the book. I know that they're going to be on other issues, and you know, it's kind of like, we'll get over it, Mark. But you know, at the same time, like Pepe was bringing such a crazy amount of energy and vision to this, and I think it was really elevating the storytelling of the book a bit. And this was like, you know, you know, you said earlier, describing the plot, that it was very safe, and I felt like the art was very safe too. There was nothing in here where I was just like, wow, look at what they're doing here, you know. Like it felt like, you know, not just any old random JRJR issue from volume 6, but also like any old random like check-in issue, you know, transition issue from JRJR in volume 6, you know. So so it was a little bland for me in that regard.
Yeah, and you mentioned the sort of like I guess come down from like Pepe Larraz or the newness of that versus this, and I'm not going to get into spoilers for what's coming, although we've had a press release about like the future of the title at 975 and 976 with the September solicits that is really going to shake up this run. And I don't want to say plot stuff, but it's going to split up the art team. And I think actually like right now, I feel like we're going to experience that sort of like harshness of that shift. But I think the long-term plans that they have for this art team is actually quite smart. And we'll talk about it and how that plays out ultimately when this book does make the big change that it seems to be suggesting, it's about to happen, or not even just suggesting, it's said outright. And so I think that like this will be a nice kind of interlude, but I think the book is going to really shine with these, alternating art teams in the future. But I thought this issue started really strong, and I remember looking at the preview pages for this issue and thinking, oh yeah, JRJR is still like coming in hot. He's going to be able to stand toe to toe with Pepe Larraz, maybe with a bit of nostalgia, but like it's the craftsmanship, the storytelling that we've come to expect from him. And I think that's pretty much universal across the story. It's not doing anything new, although I do think that as the issue goes on, some of the precision in the earlier pages kind of drops off, and I don't really know who to attribute that to until I see the pencils and the ink separately. But I feel like details on characters' faces start to kind of like get muddier. Like there's panels where people's eyes are pointing in two different directions, and like you can see some of the webbing gets less detailed, and that's all fine stuff, but it is noticeable. And then I saw a post on social media the other day from Scott Hanna, who mentioned that he's been fighting cancer and is in recovery. And this was around like April and May when this issue probably would have been produced. And so I wonder, I think obviously JRJR wants to stick with his longtime collaborator. And I wonder if like maybe we're experiencing, Scott, juggling a major lifetime like crisis
right
alongside doing work. And so I don't, like that's not to excuse, like what I think were maybe like more rushed looking inks or pencils. But I did see that note, and obviously we wish him the best in his recovery. But I wanted to point that out as an interesting sort of maybe behind the scenes thing here. And Menyz too, I think struggles with that kind of shift in detail. In some instances, he's like hyper rendered a page, and in other instances, he's doing these kind of like almost like dashy highlights that are like pure white. That like, I don't know, it just seems less detailed than his normal work, and I wonder if stuff was coming in late and people had to kind of move quickly. It's absolutely solid work. There's less diversity than I think in the Pepe Larraz stuff in terms of like how we're doing shading and all that stuff. But like, this is what you come to expect from like a standard JRJR in a modern context. And you'll never hear me complain about that. There's solid layouts. It has that humanistic touch that I think JRJR is known for. I love the setup of Spider-Man sort of stakeout scene and all of the like equipment that he has there. He has a way of really humanizing the characters and making it distinctly Spider-Man that I always appreciate. But I will say there's two major demerits, I think, narratively for me that come from the artwork that I don't think are a Joe Kelly kind of narrative bungle. There's a moment where Felicia suggests that we should fool around while they're waiting on the stakeout. And the implication is that we're going to come back to them having already fooled around.
Right.
And it comes back, and Peter has kind of forced Felicia to watch him either play video games or watch some like movie on his phone. And it's just framed in such a way that it's such a small detail that the joke doesn't really land.
Yeah.
And I miss it the first time around.
Yeah.
And so I feel like Romita could have emphasized that in the art more to make that joke really work. And then I have to, and maybe it's just because JRJR set the ceiling himself, which is, we love the reveal of the Hobgoblin back in the 80s. To me, the reveal of Hellgate here, I know it's not his first appearance, but like the threat of him appearing on this final page to me is a bit of a miss.
Yeah.
It could be design wise. I think it's also the staging of it and the way the narrative doesn't build up to it. I don't know if you have anything to say about this.
I would say I think it's more staging and build than because I feel like we know the design at this point. The design's not a surprise for the most part. And I didn't necessarily mind him in full reveal on the page per se, but like the build to it, and obviously, I mean, the Hobgoblin is a very high bar.
Sure.
But this is a character in Hellgate that, was teased in the first issue of this new volume. And it's only going to be 2 issues of Hellgate, but we don't know what the implications are. And my understanding is that Hellgate is kind of a big deal, at least initially. So you would, I would have expected maybe a little bit more of a, maybe we're seeing, not to repeat beats here from Amazing Spider-Man 238, but maybe we're seeing just his boots first, or his weapon, or you know what I mean? Like there could have been more drama to it, and they just completely decided to just, oh no, here he is. And they're just kind of like, ooh, who are you?
I love the idea of the turn the page sideways to see how tall he is in the double page spread, which, if you read it digitally, you didn't get. But I don't feel like JRJR does a lot with that image, right? Like, the sort of artist's virtual camera, I feel like could be placed lower to make him feel taller and more imposing,
right? And
really scare us. Like I got to that page and I was like, I'm not scared of this guy, right? Like his little puny little hand axes, and he just looks like a cosplayer from the Renaissance Festival showed up at the end there. And again, he could end up being this huge threat that they want us to think that he is, right? But just from the staging of the panel, he shows up with some kind of goofy dialogue about steel skin or steel threads or whatever it is, and or steel webs. And if I opened the next issue and it ended up being an ultimate Craven situation where Spider-Man just punches him once and he ends up just being this dude that just crumples immediately, I would be like, oh, what a funny joke. They've built this up and it's just a guy,
Right.
Because right now the on the page, it doesn't scare me at all, and I really wanted him to scare me and make me excited to pick up the next issue, because holy crap, this guy is going to be a real threat, and I just didn't feel that.
Yeah. All right, Dan, let's move on. We got other stuff to talk about in this issue here. Do you want to talk about?
Let's talk about the sort of in media res opening.
Sure.
Sort of if you want to say the red shirt cold opening of this book. This kind of kidnapping. What'd you think about this, Mark?
Honestly, and maybe this goes to show, I mean, not that I, after you kind of pointed it out that, the how it reflects real life it is, but why don't I feel like you have stronger opinions than I do on this, Dan, so why don't you get into it?
Yeah. So, there's these hooded kidnappers who seem gang oriented in some way, right? Like they're all wearing a sort of uniform of sorts, which is a kind of Spider-Man staple. At this point, if it's the master planner or whatever, and they've kidnapped a senator in his limo, and taken him hostage, and Spider-Man busted up. And, they say it gets immediately political. I know people don't want us to get political on this show, but they say hey, you are part of a broken system, and it's absolutely about your, policies that have got us to come after you. Right. And, they're trying to make a political statement by taking this guy. And, recent, news doesn't, make this all this foreign of an idea. Just, even just a number of years ago, you have a group of, a self-called militia group trying to kidnap Gretchen Whitmer, the governor of a state. And then, the weekend before this comic came out, you had the murder and attempted murder of, state senators and congressmen in Minnesota, which like made this moment hit all the harder, just to, see life and art, reflecting each other.
Right.
And obviously Kelly, had no idea that like something like that was going to happen around the time of this, but like it reinforces to me in my reading of this comic that Kelly is interested in wading into modern political territory here, even if it was Gretchen Whitmer that he's referencing or whatever. But like even a quote like "you represent a broken system" is very MAGA, like that is the whole kind of charge of the Trump administration is like, this is a broken system. These bureaucrats are not, doing what the people want. And we're here to bust up, government and break it down and defund it and all of that stuff. And I couldn't help but hear echoes of all of that in the pages of this comic, which is interesting to me because I think Kelly's been wading into this territory from the very beginning with that Dr. Doom preview. And I'm curious where this is going.
Yeah. Well, I guess we shall see, but we're not a political podcast, Dan. Remember that. Okay.
Sure. Right. Yeah, I agree, Mark. We're not a political podcast, but politics and art are not something you can separate, especially when it's this direct.
I like those X-Men comics before they got political, Dan.
Yeah, right. And I'm curious, if this is Hobgoblin related. He was taking down the Food and Drug Administration in previous issues, and there's an interesting implication here with the way that Tombstone appears in this issue, which is that Tombstone, uses Spider-Man to get his own needs, right? And Spider-Man 2 here, by saving this, senator, is upholding what those people would probably see as a broken system, right? He is reinforcing I will protect the senator. I'm not on the side of these thugs who are making a political statement. And it makes Spider-Man not only an agent of this system, but also, by the issue's end, an agent of Tombstone. And I wonder if Spider-Man is going to have to face, where do these allegiances lie in the law, in vigilantism, in all of these things, because it does get questioned throughout the issue.
Right. Yeah, no, good stuff, Dan. Do we want to talk a little bit about Peter and his interactions at Rand?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, we finally find out what he's going to be doing here, right?
I guess. I mean, I did kind of think it was interesting that we just have kind of met these people and Dr. Osmani's already like, well, I might be stepping aside in the future. and I didn't know if I should take the fact that, obviously we were playing up Brian's chicanery for laughs, but I'm also, her kind of being like, oh no, he doesn't have what it takes to kind of lead. I do wonder if that could be a source of tension or conflict between him and Peter at some point.
Oh, 100%. I think that's 100% a setup. This is one of those weird issues where you're like, truly, how much time has passed since the previous issue?
Right.
Because the Hobgoblin thing is like 2 nights, But here she's like, he has enough of a work record that she's like, you've been missing for 3/4 of the time. And it's like, okay, well, if I've been here for 4 days, sure. That's 3 days I missed. But the implication is that not only has he been there a long time, he's finishing projects,
right.
And she's already thinking about what would it look like for Peter to step up into leadership. And so you're like, did 6 months happen? What are we looking at here? And whatever, time in comics is timey-wimey, but this is especially timey-wimey. And I don't know how to feel about it. It feels like we're skipping past what would have been previously 60 issues of Amazing Spider-Man's worth of I'm in this office and meeting the crew and doing various adventures with them. We're getting some reinforcement here that Osmani has something else going on in her life that it's going to take her away. That seems sort of in chaos, but also, foreseeable. we got that nod about the the stepchild in the previous one. So like, I don't immediately want to read into this as some sort of villain thing, more than it could be a family thing. And I like that Joe Kelly kind of likes to play with, you could read like some of these things one way or another. It could be something very like a superhero adjacent or something very like real world character adjacent. And that's how I'm kind of choosing to read the Osmani thing for now. It's interesting. Like, although I know this book has a penchant for every character is related to a supervillain in some way. So I don't expect that my guess of it being innocuous, it will maintain for long.
Right. But like, I don't know, like Brian, at least still, Brian is certainly as a character still feels very questionable, I guess. Is this a word? I don't know. Like he's got this kind of casual misogyny about him. I don't know. Like I mean, certainly we've been talking about him and the mushrooms and, when, the Chekhovian gun of it all with that. But like, it also just seems like he's not the greatest person in the world, even though Peter owes him, for getting him the job. So I don't know. We'll see what happens there.
Yeah, I'm really interested in this because that flashback with the sort of like Playboy magazine that was kind of set up before. And, I think there's been several allusions to like having the hots for Osmani and asking her on a date or whatever. And here, he talks about like Peter being spanked by her and all that stuff. And so there's this, like you said, casual misogyny, and Peter feels, I think, increasingly uncomfortable with this. There's that like panel of him giving Peter like a head noogie or whatever that Peter looks really not happy about.
Right.
And you mentioned the setup conflict because Brian explicitly says like, I'm ready to lead that, like looking forward to leading that group where I'll be the leader. And Peter knows that that's kind of not a plan that's being set up to happen.
Yeah.
And so the way I choose to read it, especially with Brian's comments about, his father thinking that he should be a plumber, is that I think Brian struggles with this idea of like who he is and the sort of like roles that he's kind of meant to fill, or like feels that he's struggling to not feel or rise above, or like what he's owed from the world, between his language towards women, or like the feeling that Peter owes him for securing the job and the way he keeps kind of holding that over Peter's head, and his sort of like elevation in the workspace where he's kind of casually goofing off, but still expecting to get a raise that's coming to him. And I suspect that like in the future, if that shell breaks, that we're due for sort of like, what is it? The fireworks factory. We're due for a sort of cataclysmic explosion when Brian realizes that like his expectations don't really meet reality.
Yeah. No, we'll find out, Dan. You're really trying to project this whole run tonight, aren't you, Dan?
I'm not, but I think that's the way the character is being set up. Right?
Sure.
Like we are seeing him being lifted up, and this sort of, in the culture, I don't know if this is truly what you would say is like toxic masculinity, but you see someone that really has like a sort of setup of idea of what is expected to him and what's not actually going to arrive,
right,
or how loosely he can play things.
Right.
Anyway, Tombstone shows up to interrupt this. You liked this setup, so tell me what you liked about it.
Well, I mean, I guess it was just nice to see Tombstone back, even though it really hasn't been that long. But like even just like, Peter meeting at the window of the limousine, like it's just it felt familiar. Like Peter knows he's getting used, but like it's like Tombstone is kind of the supervillain / shades of gray character that he just can't quit. And like he kind of puts him in a I like the moral quandary that Tombstone has been consistently putting him in over the last couple of years. I think that's just what it boils down to at the end of the day. I think it's a good test of Spider-Man's ethics and center in terms of how he's going to react in a certain situation.
I admittedly struggled with this a bit just because last time that this exact scenario happened, Tombstone tried to kill
Right.
Peter, you know?
Sure.
And then that whole court thing. And I feel like it
Jurisprudence.
almost, yeah, I feel like it almost like, almost gives away Peter's role in Spider-Man's life, that he would even be willing to like talk to Tombstone, like to Tombstone, right? If I was Tombstone, I wouldn't expect this guy to ever come near my car, you know, like
Sure.
ever again, unless there was another shoe to drop, you know? Like, why does Peter continue playing the in-between if there's not something else going on there? Now, obviously, no one's going to find out Peter's identity as Spider-Man because it would undo, you know, the whole thing. But like, it does seem like a little bit too calm for someone who just tried to kill him. But he does acknowledge it, you know, and I guess you're right. At the end of the day, the status quo remained that like Spider-Man knows, or Peter knows, that Tombstone didn't kill him when he had the chance to do so as Spider-Man, and that you know, there's my enemy, and then there's the enemy that I can kind of trust won't go all the way, and at least I can rely on that being somewhat truthful.
Yeah. Yeah, nothing to add to that, Dan. We have Peter and Felicia on a stakeout. Like, I mean, as we break this down, Dan, it does really kind of reinforce just how many check-ins are in this comic book. It's just a lot, and yet nothing really happens, which is kind of odd.
Yeah.
But okay, we have some Peter or I should say some Spidey and Felicia on a stakeout. Anything you want to add about this?
Well, I had a question for you. Like, what did you understand was like how Felicia got there? Like, was she tipped off by Tombstone as well?
You're reading into it further than I am, Dan. I don't know. I just
she says she got a tip. So
Okay.
like that makes me wonder. You know, like, are people playing against each other? Like, what is really going on there? Maybe we'll never find out. But like, anytime two characters arrive on a scene and it like alludes to like how they got there, I'm asking myself like, okay, like, you know, did he send her a text? You know, like, you know, like what had happened here? I like this interplay. I think it's the sort of like interplay that made them popular as a couple in the 80s, the sort of like flirty, like sexualized tension, you know, the sort of like Beauty and the Geek kind of thing. But I still can't help but feel it's somewhat of a regression for the character after what Jed MacKay has done with her in the book, where he's kind of elevated her above this kind of thing, being like doting towards Spider-Man. But you know, I won't lie that there is some funny stuff that happens here between them. I like the sort of like, I'm a gamer and I'm going to not make out with you because I'm going to make you play this video game with me. And, but I can't help but acknowledge it does feel somewhat regressive for the character still.
I think it's just regressive for both of them, if I'm being honest with you, Dan. I mean, like, I know both fans and clearly certain creators just love Peter and Felicia together, and we're just, you know, like, it's kind of like, you know, they're it's the anti-Peter and MJ. I think in you know, at least with a lot of modern creators, it's like, oh, how but like, you know, in the same vein, people are like, well, you know, what are we supposed to do with Peter and MJ together? It's like, I'm kind of like, well, what are we supposed to be doing with Peter and Felicia? Like, what is the tension here? Like, it's, you know, and we could talk about it vis-a-vis Shay in a second here, but like, at the end of the day, it's like, okay, so like, they're kind of hooking up, but like, you know, we already learned what, you know, a handful of issues ago that like, there's no future there, which is fine, but like, I don't know, like, I think,
yeah.
I think it becomes less appealing when there are potential options there, but like, instead we're doing this storyline with him and Shay right now, where it's like, well, we can't make this an official thing because, you know, she and like, there's some points of interest with what Shay. Let's just go right into the Shay part of this, Dan. I mean, I think that's where it's a natural segue, but like, you know, I understand what they're trying to set up with Shay here is that, you know, in many ways, you know, she's probably the most self-assured, healthiest person that Peter has attempted to see in quite some time. You know, there doesn't seem to be a lot of damage there, which is good. You know, she calls Peter out on his nonsense, and, you know, kind of, you know, obviously, like, she's telling him, I'm going on a date, and, you know, well, what, we're not exclusive. And, you know, I know you're not exclusive either. I could see from, you know, the hair, you know, the silver hairs on your, you know, on your clothing. So, like, you know, like, she's perceptive, she's smart, she's got a little bit of sass to her. I mean, it's interesting, but, like, at the same time, it's like, there's a part of me that's like, okay, so we're like, I don't want to, like, I'm not trying to ask a female character to betray her morals and her personality here, but at the same time, I'm like there is something clearly appealing to this pairing, and they're not giving us that either. And then kind of doing it vis-a-vis Felicia, like, there's a part of me that's just like I want to see them pull the trigger in one way or another here, either, like, you know what I mean? Because it just seems silly to be like keeping this one ball in the air but not actually spinning it. That's what it feels like to me right now.
I mean, for me, I'll go back to the thing I said at the start of this episode is I think the key element that's missing is Peter's opinion on this. Like, he kind of scoffs on her going on another date. And he, you know, for whatever reason, I think seems to avoid hooking up with Felicia on this stakeout. But, like, we don't really allowed, like, does he want to be with Shay? You know, like, because otherwise we're back in the sort of space that we were in, you know, in the 80s, where it's like Felicia is convenient for my personality as Spider-Man, whereas Shay is convenient for my personality as Peter, right? And, like, but in not knowing what Peter actually wants, you know, maybe he's happy maintaining that,
right,
which would be nice to know too. We don't know what to root for, and we don't know you know, how this is going to play out. Like, right now, I'm rooting for Shay because she seems like a fairly, like, healthy person for Peter to be with. Maybe too healthy, given that the last we heard from her, she was in trauma from all of her coworkers being murdered.
Right.
And there's no follow up on that here. In fact, she even just says, like, oh yeah, da-da-da has a baby. And it's like, well, wait a minute. I thought everybody was murdered. Were we talking about, like, the sort of office politics again?
Right.
Yeah, that's the thing I want to know, because, like, it's not really what I want. It's like what Peter wants. And, like, how is it life getting in the way of him achieving that makes it richly dramatic. And right now, like, he seems okay with this setup.
Right.
And so therefore it's dramatically inert.
Yep. No, yeah. I mean, and I guess I'm, you know, not that I necessarily have to put my chips on the table here, but I mean, I am rooting for Shay, but, like, I don't know. Like, with, like, a lot of the subplots in this story here, Dan, I feel like we you know, we keep circling the fence the same way here. You know what I mean? It would be nice to move in on one of these storylines, and we haven't yet. So, speaking of which, let's talk about May, which, again, like, it's more of the same. Yeah. So, I mean, but anything specifically you wanted to point out here?
I mean, it's literally like a beat for beat redo of the Shay thing, right? It's like May is like, hey, like, why not? Like, Shay seems nice. Well, like, why don't you make, like, that official? And Peter's like, I'm happy with the status quo. Like we've been saying, I guess that this is the one insight we get into his mind is he's like, yeah, this is fine. I'm okay with this. And she says to us, the audience, like, I don't have forever, you know, and, like, so that's May's desire, right? She wants Peter to get with a nice girl. That's May's desire, right? Now, you could, like I said, with the Osmani thing, you could read this two different ways. You could read it in the sort of superhero drama way of May being, like, knows that she's dying, right? Maybe the cancer flared back up again, or her new quote unquote friend is getting in deep with the crypto sharks.
Right. There you go.
You know, and it's on May's head, you know, whatever. Or it's the sort of, like, age-old motherly desire to see your kid happy and fulfilled so that you can enjoy that as long as possible, like I'm tired of seeing Peter bouncing around. It's time for him, I want to be a grandmother, and not just his mom kind of thing. And you could read that either way here, but it's the exact same thing that Shay said to him is like, hey, step up. We don't have forever here. And Peter's just like, okay, I'm fine with it the way it goes, maybe the next issue introduces a ticking clock where we find out like, actually he doesn't have all the time in the world. And so his status quo attitude needs to change very quickly, which is like, then great. The setup is really good. But right now it's like kind of boring because Peter seems fine. We get confirmation, I think, in some ways that Ricardo is a significant other of May's, more than we have in the past. We got a name, he knows personal things about May's taste, and she's coaching him on how to talk to Peter. And so, like, I guess we're going to go down that road again, of yet again another beau for May who will tragically die by an unnamed disease.
I guess so.
And
unless she goes first,
yeah,
right?
yeah, and just to keep more of the sort of like the new is old, we check in with Norman and he's still Peter's friend. And I guess the only real difference here is that we like find out that he's not using goblin tactics to take down the hobgoblin as he did in the Zeb Wells run.
Sure.
More than he is going to be using lawyers and things like that.
Jurisprudence.
So, yeah.
that old chestnut.
Frankly, I was happy about that because, like, I mean, maybe it's a swerve that's meant to be off-guarding, but like with so much of the sort of red herrings of like Norman might go evil again, this felt like a solid like line to put in the other column of like, oh, Norman's going about this how a normal person would. If trying to take down a corrupt company and businessman. So like, okay. So there's that. And then, the comic ends with, Hellgate. And I think I got all of my criticism of Hellgate, and that appearance kind of like out of the gate early on in this review. So unless you have anything else to add, I think that's kind of most of the stuff in this issue.
What's your take on Steel Silk, which is like, I guess his nickname or whatever for Spider-Man? Like what is this supposed to be, like something old timey, or is this just like random words for Spider-Man?
Yeah, I mean, look, what it reminds me of is the sort of like a mumbo jumbo like wordage that we got around YEP, and the sort of like the Crimson Woman or whatever it was.
Right.
We're dipping back into that sort of well maybe again. I mean, who knows? Maybe he's a Mayan god or whatever, and he's from that same dimension. I know you would really balk at that. I guess I should look and see if the font choice is the same, but I don't know. I mean, his webs are as strong as steel, so Steel Silk. I don't know. Steel seems very modern, of like a technology for a sort of like Greek god to make reference to.
Well, we haven't established he's a Greek god yet. I guess that's part of it. Is like we really don't know anything about this character, except that he kind of looks like Ares, from Dark Avengers or whatever. But other than that, I don't know.
Yeah, now I'm like looking up when like smelting became a thing.
Okay. Okay.
Like would this guy who's been sealed away in this like this like sort of fossilized tree know about the crafting of steel?
Right.
Whatever.
Right.
Now I'm really overthinking it.
There you
go. You asked me to say anything about it. That's the direction.
That's
I'm
that's where you're going. Okay.
Yeah.
I at the end of the day, I guess it's, we're when it comes to Hellgate, I think we're still in the telling, not showing phase of this character in terms of the threat level he represents. I mean, like, both visually, but just, we, again, like I said earlier in the episode, we're kind of being led to believe it's a big deal, although it's also, again, only a couple of issues, but like, why make such a big deal about it in the first issue? And, admittedly, I bought a variant with Hellgate on it, like the design variant, because I'm like, well, they made a design variant, like it must be a big deal. You know what I mean? Like you never know. Gotta get my collector's cover here, like the Red Goblin one that went crazy back in the day. But
again, this is all generated out of marketing in the same way that the sort of like what did Peter do was a marketing generation. You know, like we know Hellgate is on the cover of 975.
Right.
We know that there's been variants with him on it. We've seen in, what was it, issue 65 of volume 6, he's like this giant hulking shadow over the dead Spider-Man, and all of the marketing stuff has said, you know, like some big change is coming with Hellgate. And I tend to believe them, you know, in that regard. I do think that whatever's coming in the next 2 issues will probably set up much of the run leading up to 1,000,
right,
or at least 975. But I don't really lay it at the feet of the comic necessarily, because if you just read issue 1 and then this, and didn't look back at the sort of like, you know, issue 65 as premonitions about the future and make that connection, it would just be the arrival of any other, you know, foe of Spider-Man. You know, I don't think they've made a huge deal out of him on the pages of the comic quite yet.
Yeah.
So maybe it's a false criticism to say his wasn't as splashy a debut as we needed, but it also was a cliffhanger that didn't make me go, I need to pick up the next issue to find out what Hellgate's up to.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. No, for sure. All right. You got a grade for this thing, Dan?
I think I was originally going to go with a B-, but I think in talking about it more, I'm more in the C+ territory. It's like a slightly above average issue of Spider-Man.
Yeah, I'm actually in lockstep there, and like much like you originally, like I think like on fresh read it was like, oh, maybe it's a B-, but I think like the more we get into it, I'm like, it just felt a little redundant,
light,
and yeah, light, and yet like, you know, I mean, you know, we've been talking about a lot of these different like subplots and stuff like that, but like. We're talking about the fact that it happened, not so much that it actually did anything. So, you know what I mean? So it's like,
or made you feel any particular way.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's what it is. Like, I don't have strong feelings about anything in this comic just yet. But you know, I remain to be emotionally traumatized in another 2 weeks, maybe. So we'll see what happens.
Yeah. All right. Well, Mark, why don't you take us home?
Well, that brings us to the end of this episode, but we want to thank you, the listeners and viewers, for tuning into this episode of The Amazing Spider Talk. This podcast exists because of the support of our listeners on Patreon, where for only $4.99 a month, the cost of a new comic, you can help support our show's existence while getting early episodes, including these reviews, the same week the comics release, as well as all of the unreleased episodes of the complete season 7 of our show, exclusive artwork, and a ton of other bonuses.
Yeah, if you value smart comics criticism and historical analysis, we hope you'll consider supporting us on Patreon. What we do on the show is admittedly niche. Still, if you find our Spider-Man commentary and community valuable, we can only continue doing what we do with your support on Patreon.
Thank you to everyone who supports us in our work. If you want to join their ranks, please go to amazingspidertalk.com and click the Patreon button to sign up to join our club.
So, Mark, until we both manage to get a platinum trophy in the yet-to-be-released PlayStation title Journey into Mystery, right after you play The Last of Us, what's our motto?
With great podcasts, there must also come the Amazing Spider Talk.